of the things that I did. And I really appreciate that, Dana. And I also know that Dana is a man that is always on time. In fact, he is so timely, he was here last week on Wednesday, and he called me and he said, Doug, where is everybody? I go, it's next week, Dana. He goes, oh, well, I got here early, so everything's cool. Most of you are familiar with Dana's background in sports. I remember seeing him on the Dick Tomey show doing that, the Lute Olson show, and now he's with IMG Sports Marketing. So let's welcome Dana, and God bless him.
Doug was a wrestler, and believe me, it's no fun playing basketball with a guy who was a wrestler. Because he guards you like he was wrestling with you. Forgiven but not forgotten. I never forget playing basketball against Doug. So, now let me make sure I got all my stuff here. I think I do. You know, when a tragedy like what happened 10 days ago happens in our community, and it's so dominant on our minds, and then somebody invites you to come and speak, there's a temptation to say, well, I'll talk about the tragedy, but I think by now I don't have anything to shed about that event that you haven't already heard, and probably from much better sources, much better insight, much better perspective than me. But there is one thing that I did want to say, and I did want to comment on, kind of in the spirit of what Doug mentioned, what Doug and Rick Vaughn are working on with this messaging campaign. I was really deeply troubled by one thing that our sheriff said, and it wasn't the way he launched the debate about vitriol in the public discourse. That's a good discussion, I think. But what he said that really troubled me, he said that southern Arizona, and maybe the state of Arizona, is a mecca of prejudice and bigotry. We all know that every city in America, every city in the world is infested with prejudice and bigotry. And that's because everywhere you go, there are human beings. And that's the nature of the human condition. But if we stop and take a look back at what happened on that day, there were some amazing stories that came out of that. There's Daniel Hernandez, this 22-year-old intern who, by, I think, divine appointment, was there at Gabby's side. And he instinctively responded in a rather heroic fashion, to say nothing of the training that he had to prop her upright. There's a 76-year-old woman who sees what's going on. She's on the ground. She reaches over and she takes the second clip from the shooter to prevent twice as many people from dying. There's a 74-year-old retired Army colonel, Mr. Barber, who, in spite of a wound to his head from a bullet, tackled this kid. There's the paramedics and all of the first responders who were there so quickly. There is a graduate of Push Ridge Christian Academy who was in the Walgreens buying cigarettes. He hears the pop, pop, pop. He runs to the trouble. He helps tackle the shooter. There's the surgeons at University Medical Center. There's a friend of mine, Nancy Bowman, and her husband Dave, who were shopping in the Safeway. They were in the produce section. They hear the gunfire. Nancy's a nurse. David's a doctor. Instead of lying down on the floor or going back and locking themselves in the protection of the refrigerated cooler, they run to the trouble. And because she's a nurse, because he's a doctor, they were able to help give aid and comfort to people who were wounded. Nancy administered CPR for 2 or 3 minutes to Judge Roll before he died. Until finally her husband had to come up to her and say, sweetheart, he's gone. You can't help him. You need to help somebody else that needs your help. So you think about those 5 or 6 or 7 stories, and I take great offense to that one thing that Sheriff Dupnick said, because it's not true. So I want to nominate our community as being a mecca, but not a mecca for what he said. But I want to nominate Tucson and acknowledge and honor our community for being a mecca of heroism and virtue and courage. And I dare say that most people in this room, if we found ourselves in a circumstance like that, would find a way to contribute. Because just as we are, as a community, infested with prejudice and bigotry, we are also blessed to be living with thousands and thousands of people who have courage and the virtues of heroism. And I think that out of this tragedy, that's one of the things that is most important for us to understand and to realize. And that's what Doug and Rick are working to put together with so many other people is a campaign that will help remind us of the great things that we have in our community, particularly in the resources of the people we have. So that's thus ended the soapbox, but I did want to share that with you. Well, one of my favorite stories is a story about a nun who was standing on a street corner, and she's trying to hail a cab in a very busy city, and dozens of cabs are flying by, and she just can't seem to pick up a cab. So finally, this one cab goes by, happens to see her. Cabbie slams on his brakes, puts it in reverse, and backs up. Seems to be very eager to pick up this nun. And the nun hops in the back seat, grateful to finally catch a ride. And then they continue on down the street, and she just happens to notice that this fairly handsome young cab driver keeps staring at her in the rearview mirror. A little uncomfortable. This goes on for 5 or 6 minutes, and finally she says, "Excuse me, sir, but why are you staring at me?" And this young cab driver says, "Well, I have to confess, I've always had this fantasy about being kissed passionately by a nun." She thinks, well, this is a little unusual. And then to his great amazement, the nun says, "Well, you know what? I think we can fulfill that fantasy for you. So just pull over to the side right here." He can't believe this. So he pulls over. The nun comes up, hops in the front seat next to him, puts her arm around him, and just gives him a big, long kiss. And he just can't believe it. The nun turns around, gets in the back seat. They drive another 2 or 3 blocks, and the cabbie breaks down in tears. Well, now the nun says, "What's the matter? I just fulfilled this lifelong fantasy that you have." And the nun had told him, "Now, I'm only going to kiss you as long as you are single and you're Catholic. Those are the 2 conditions, single and Catholic." And he had told her, "No, I am single and I am Catholic." So she planted the big kiss on him. So he breaks down in tears, and he says, I have to confess, I'm really married and I'm Jewish." And the nun goes, "Well, that's all right. My name's Kevin, and I'm on my way to a Halloween party." So the lesson and the moral of the story is, we are not who we appear to be many times. Isn't that true? We all have a masquerade that we live behind from time to time. So when Doug Martin calls me from time to time and he asks me, "Hey, would you come and share at Business Fellowship?" I always have conflicting emotions because I am not always who I appear to be. And one sense says, geez, it's really an honor to be asked to share. On the other hand, but who am I? What do I have to say? Are you kidding me? Why are you qualified to get up in front of somebody and share about anything? You got issues. So may I just begin by saying that I am chief among sinners, and whatever message you get today is coming from a frail, fragile, and broken source. But I do have a couple of things that I did want to share with you, and it's interesting, the same process always happens. Somebody will call and say, "Come speak." And I spend about 75% of the time between the invitation and the event fretting because I don't have anything to say. Which literally is true. I don't. Until I get out of the way and say, "God, what am I supposed to say? What do you want me to talk about?" And it is amazing how God will reveal a message to us when we finally diminish ourselves and say, "What do you want me to say?" So the source of today's message comes from a very inspiring and highly credible source, and that would be my dryer in the utility at our house. A couple of weeks ago, after that hard freeze that we had, I put out sheets and towels to cover up all the plants. And the next weekend, had to bring them in and run them through the laundry again. Can't put them away dirty. So I took them out of the wash and stuck them in the dryer, and the dryer's doing its thing. And about 20 minutes later, I hear this. Dryer's making a death noise. And I run in there, and it has shut down. Now, it's one of these fairly new high-tech dryers. It's an intelligent dryer. And the load is all out of sorts. The sheets and the towels got all bundled up, and they've been pressed against one side of the drum in the dryer. And there's a 2-letter code on the LED face of the dryer. UL. It doesn't stand for you loser. You know what it says? Uneven load. The dryer can figure out, it has a sensor in there, and instead of continuing to operate in a manner that dryer, if it didn't have a UL sensor in it, I think it would have walked itself down the hallway. But it shut itself down because it can't operate properly or even safely with an uneven load. And I stood there and I looked at that and went, thank you, Lord. I think I understand the direction that you want me to go. That dryer was out of balance. And instead of continuing to operate in a mode where it was out of balance, it shut down until the load could be rebalanced. Now, the dryer isn't smart enough or capable enough to rebalance the load itself. That required the intervention of an outside source, hopefully smarter than the dryer, to rebalance the load, reset it, turn it on again, and I was able to finish the laundry. So I got to thinking about balance. How do we achieve balance and maintain balance in our lives? And I just started digging into this whole issue of balance a little bit. And what is the symptoms of a balance disorder? The dryer was getting ready to walk itself down the hallway because it was out of balance. But in our lives, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, what are some symptoms of a balance disorder? And what is balance? So I Googled that question, what is balance? And I got this from Dr. Edelman at Lehigh University Center for Application of Mathematics. The system of 10 laws of conservation is embedded in a system of 15 laws of balance that derive from the conformal group of a Minkowski space. The derivation of laws of conservation and of laws of balance by use of the groups of isometries and of conformal motions in general relativity is shown to be a direct extension of the result of those obtained in a Minkowski space. Thanks a lot. That's a big help. So I kept looking. What is a balance disorder? National Institute of Health says if your balance is impaired, you may feel as if the room is spinning. Is that not true? You may stagger when you try to walk, or teeter or fall when you try to stand up. Some of the symptoms you might experience are dizziness or vertigo, spinning sensation, falling or feeling as if you're going to fall, lightheadedness, faintness or a floating sensation, blurred vision, confusion or disorientation. Other symptoms are nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, changes in heart rate and blood pressure, and then listen to this, symptoms of balance disorder, fear, anxiety, panic. Some people also feel tired, depressed, or unable to concentrate. Symptoms may come and go over short periods of time or last for longer periods.